morning, everybody. I'm Pamela Lopez at K Street Consulting. I'm here with my colleague, McKenna Jenkins. We work closely with CalCAPA and have worked closely with your Legislative Advocacy Committee over the past couple of months in developing an agenda for the upcoming 2020 legislative year. As many of you know, this is CalCAPA's first foray into legislative advocacy. And so this is really a building year for our organization. The goal of today's webinar is to support all of the executive directors of community action agencies throughout the state in building your own muscle and your own comfort with doing legislative advocacy. Because this is our first year, the Legislative Committee at CalCAPA chose to focus on supporting internal building so that we are putting together a really strong team so that in future years, in out years, we can do additional forward-facing initiatives as the organization so chooses. Looking at our first slide, our goals for today's webinar are to dispel myths about advocacy, talk about what is advocacy versus what is lobbying or what is political activity, to provide an overview of key decision makers, to provide guidance about basic mechanics of meetings with lawmakers and decision makers. So how do you schedule a meeting? How do you call and reach out and ask for that? And then provide an overview of CalCAPA's goals for advocacy in 2020. And we hope that by the end of this first webinar, all of those who are watching it will feel comfortable reaching out to their legislator in their district office, their senator and their assembly member, and requesting a meeting with either the lawmaker or staff. What is advocacy? Advocacy is something that anybody can do. And this is important to talk about because I know that there has been some initial trepidation among community action agency executive directors, given that we are all public agencies, about whether or not we can engage in advocacy. Advocacy is communicating with officials from any branch of government to provide relevant information about how programs, proposals, proposed legislation, etc., may affect the work of community action agencies or our clients. So one example among many is reaching out to the lawmakers who sit on the Health and Human Services Committee in the Assembly, for example, and saying CalCAPA supports AB 298 because it would bring greater resources to the families that we serve. The bill is good public policy. The goal behind advocacy is to bring our expertise to help shape the decisions of lawmakers. We are not telling voters what to do, and we are not telling lawmakers what to do, but we are providing them with expert information. And I should also note that every citizen, every individual, every organization is an expert in something. The reason anyone is allowed to do advocacy is because lawmakers want to hear, and our representative system is designed so that lawmakers hear from their constituents, they hear from interest groups, they hear from the leaders of different public agencies, and that builds their knowledge of what it is that they should be working on, the bills that they should introduce, support, oppose, etc. That communication is important to a good policy-making process. And so it is not regulated as long as it is not the majority of your day job. And in this instance, it would not be for any executive director at CalCAPA doing a small amount of advocacy and meetings in your local community would never reach the threshold that it's considered your main job. As long as it is not your main job, we can all, every single one of us, and we should, in a professional capacity, let lawmakers know what we can share about the causes of poverty, the consequences of poverty, and what we need at community action agencies in order to be successful. Next slide. Why it's important, we talked about that a little bit. Lawmakers and bureaucrats rely on information from private citizens, private interests, and public agencies to get ideas about what it is that they should work on. Who better than community action agency executive directors to provide expertise about the causes and consequences of poverty and what community action agencies need? They want to hear from us. Lawmakers want to hear from us about what is happening in our communities and what our needs are in order to be successful. I would just add that everyone else is doing it, and the squeakiest wheel gets the grease. The reason that I became a lobbyist is because everybody has one. And it really bothered myself and my business partner, Afrak Vargas, when we founded our firm more than 10 years ago, that we saw a lot of powerful and moneyed interest with lobbyists, but there were also really good guys and good gals who were out there and doing important work who didn't have the same level of representation. And so we founded our firm with the goal of promoting social justice through advocacy and lobbying, because we want a mouthpiece not just for those who can, afford the big fancy private jets to fly around in and the corporate lawyers, but for everybody. And so public schools have lobbyists, cities and communities have lobbyists, all sorts of public agencies and entities have lobbyists, and it's important that CalCAPA is part of that policy dialogue at the state level, because if we're not, it's just sort of assumed by lawmakers that we're not speaking up because nothing is important is happening or we don't need anything. And that's absolutely not true. So not only is it good if we show up, but we got to show up. It's bad if we don't, because everybody else is in that conversation and we need to be there too. Ongoing, repeated contact is an important way to establish relationships and credibility. The other reason that advocacy is so important is because we don't just want to show up occasionally. We want to build consistent relationships with lawmakers and their staff and with the bureaucrats that run the key agencies that affect our work, so that the first time that we're meeting with them, we're not asking for something big. And by the time we're asking for something big, we've established an ongoing supportive relationship with them. And then it's important for us all to be a part of this advocacy work to grow CalCAPA's internal advocacy capacity. I have expertise. I'm sharing some of that with all of you, but we want all of our agency directors to feel comfortable sitting down and meeting with lawmakers and sharing the message. And it also amplifies our footprint, right? 50 voices are a lot louder than one voice consistently running around in the Capitol. Next slide. So let's talk about what you cannot do as an agency director. And this is important because if an action does not fall into this non-allowable bucket, you can do it. And so I'm sharing this with you to help everybody feel very comfortable that most communication is absolutely allowable. Community action agencies are public agencies, so you cannot use your public agency resources to promote a specific campaign. An example of this would be an email from your personal email account encouraging all of your colleagues to vote for Elizabeth Warren. Now, you could send an email from your professional community action agency email account to all of your colleagues talking about ideas that Elizabeth Warren has to provide additional funding for community action agencies and how that might be good for your operations, as long as you do not explicitly say at the end of the email, now I hope everybody gets out there and votes for Elizabeth Warren and encourages everyone else to do the same. As long as the conversation is focused on policy and it's deliberative or informational, these are good policies to address poverty. These are, in my professional opinion, bad policies to address poverty. That's all acceptable. You just can't say, go give Elizabeth Warren money, or I'm fundraising for her, or you should go vote for her on Saturday. A caveat to that is what you do with your own time and your own resources is your First Amendment right, and it's always allowable. So from your personal email account or on your personal Facebook page, you can tell everyone you know that your friend is running for state assembly or city council or school board, and encourage people to donate to her campaign. You can use your personal email account, your Instagram, your Facebook, whatever, to let folks know that you love Bernie Sanders and that you're voting for him in the primary and that they ought to vote for him too. As long as it's personal, you can do it. Sometimes it's important to use your discretion and think about the image or impression of you as a community action agency director and how that bleeds over into your personal image, or how your personal image bleeds back over into your agency director role. And that's an important consideration, but it is a public relations one. It's not a legal one. You can do whatever you want in your personal time from a legal standpoint. I have a little test. Could you do an interview with your local radio station? Let's say your local NPR affiliate wants to interview you as the director of a community action agency. They're doing a program on poverty and, you know, the Great War on Poverty, and they're talking about community action agencies. Could you answer questions in your professional capacity about whether Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Michael Bloomberg's policy ideas will reduce childhood poverty? And the answer is yes, you absolutely could. If someone says, here's, you know, one proposal, here's a second proposal, and here's a third proposal, can you tell me as a community action agency director what proposals you think will effectively address childhood poverty? You could absolutely evaluate those, as long as you don't explicitly say, get out there and vote for Bernie, or get out there and vote for Buttigieg, or whatever it might be. I'm going to stop there because that's the first segment of our webinar, and it addresses what you can and cannot do as a community action agency director, and I want to make sure that everybody feels very comfortable with that. Are there any questions from the group?
This is Jonathan with CalCAPA. I just want to remind our attendees that if you have a question or comment, please use the chat function. It may be kind of hidden for folks, but if you just scroll your mouse on the top, you'll see a little chat icon there, and you can place a question in the chat box over there. So if you have a question for Pamela, please go ahead and enter in your question in the chat box.
Can you read that for me, McKenna?
Pamela, are you able to see the questions come in?
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, so from Maria, do you have any protocols regarding endorsements, not for candidates, but for measures?
Yes, the protocols are the same. So if there is a ballot, if there is a measure on a ballot, whether it is local or, great question, Maria, if there is a measure, a ballot measure either on your local related to city taxes or state, the rules are the same. You could, in your professional capacity, talk about what is in the proposition. You can, in your professional capacity, evaluate whether you think that that will be good for your community action agency or harm your community action agency. And a concrete example might be that there is a ballot initiative in your city that would increase local parcel taxes, and a little bit of that money might be available in a competitive grant for community action agencies. You could absolutely talk about how your community action agency would use that money and that it would benefit the community as a whole. You could not say, I endorse this initiative, or I encourage you to get out and vote for it. But you could say, and so I'm smiling because you can see how almost silly this line is. You could certainly say, this public policy will support children in my community. And I'll stop there. And then, of course, the reminder that same for ballot initiatives as candidate races. As a private citizen, you can do whatever you want in your own time. including donating money and encouraging others to do so.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions before we continue?
Okay.
Great.
So key decision makers, who is it that we lobby? Of course, most of our funding at community action agencies comes from the federal government, but that funding passes through to state government, and then state government does a lot of decision making about exactly how it will be distributed and who qualifies among our clients for the resources that community action agencies have to offer. So keeping an eye on federal programs is very important, but in terms of the flavor of the way that community action agencies operate, keeping an eye to state government is still critical. The California governor, of course, Gavin Newsom, proposes the budget. He is responsible for coming out with the first of many versions of budget proposals, which he does in early January. He also has budget veto power and legislative veto power. So the governor can line item veto specific components of the budget, cross out specific lines without vetoing the entire budget. So even if there are elements of the budget in that back and forth negotiation with the legislature that he does not feel good about, when it gets to his desk, he can remove them. And then the governor also has the power of appointing the members of his cabinet who set the direction on policy for all of the state agencies that are responsible for overseeing our work and the work of others in public agencies in the state. The California Legislature is obviously a key player as well. A key priority for CalCAPA in 2020 is building relationships with the state legislature, and that's because there are enough of them that they are relatively easy to get to. You know, it would be tough to request a meeting with Gavin Newsom and have him personally accept that meeting. But it's imaginable that we can request a meeting with our local assembly member when he or she is back in their district and get them to take that meeting with the director of their local community action agency. The legislature negotiates with the governor on the budget. They also come up with their own versions of budget proposals and share those back and forth with the governor. And the legislature, individual members of the legislature have the sole power to introduce legislation, including the budget. So even for the budget or even any initiative that the governor wants to work on, he needs to find a friendly legislator who will introduce that bill and carry it for him and be the author of the bill. And then, of course, the state bureaucracy is very important. They take their marching orders from the governor's cabinet and are instrumental in overseeing a lot of the work that we do. And so we have goals at CalCAPA for building relationships at all of those levels with a special eye this year to starting to build relationships with our locally elected lawmakers. The Senate, the California State Senate, has 40 members. They all represent the same size district. The districts are very big. They are larger than California congressional districts. So you can imagine hundreds and hundreds of thousands of individuals and voters in each Senate district. These are big, tough elections to win. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for state senators to run in and win those elections. And so something I always point out that feels a little bit different about the California state legislature as opposed to other state legislatures is just the bigness and the professionalism of it. It takes a lot of political acumen to run successfully and win a race, where you've got 700,000 people in your district as opposed to a smaller state like New Hampshire. The Senate is dominated by a Democratic supermajority, which means that on spending decisions and others, they have the 2/3 majority that they need to sort of roll. Democrats have the 2/3 majority that they need to sort of roll Republicans. That does not mean that relationships with the Republicans who represent our individual community action agencies are not important. They are very important. We want to build relationships with all of our lawmakers, but this is definitely a Democratic-controlled Senate. The Senate, by the way, is the more left-leaning wing. The Assembly is also controlled by Democrats with a 2/3 supermajority, but some of those individual Democrats are more moderate. The Senate is pretty squarely left, far left. The pro tem in the Senate is Toni Atkins. She is from San Diego, and a great pro tem, in my opinion, for the issues that we care about at CalCAPA. Senator Atkins shares with anyone that she grew up in poverty in Appalachia, and so very near and dear to her heart are issues around poverty and childhood poverty. She's a member of the LGBT Caucus, lives in San Diego with her wife and their dogs. She's also a very big dog lover, and will be in leadership in the Senate for quite some time. Thinking about how a bill moves through the legislature. Anyone remember Schoolhouse Rock? I'm just a bill here on Capitol Hill. Yeah, I'm only a bill. Same thing in the state legislature as Congress. The only difference between the main difference between the California legislature and Congress is that Congress typically sets rules around how they will act on specific pieces of legislation for each piece of legislation. So they're Robert's Rules of Orders, if you will, although they're not following Robert's rules, but their procedural rules are set each time for each bill. In the California Senate, we typically have a uniform set of procedures that we follow. Leadership can choose to whip their members, and a supermajority vote can change those rules, but we typically proceed with the same set of rules every time a bill gets introduced, and that introduction deadline is coming up. This Friday is the last day for lawmakers to introduce legislation in the 2020 session, unless they pull some really complex procedural moves with the votes and support of leadership. We are going to see most everything that we're looking at for 2020 introduced by this Friday. There will be thousands of pieces of legislation for us to comb through, and we do, in fact, read through all of them. We can advise CalCAPA and the Legislative Committee on items that you might want to support or oppose. Once that bill is introduced, it has to sit for a month and sort of cool off and be available for parties to read. I'm going to stop because I see a question that has come in.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I see your question here. Your question is, what is CalCAPA's current/past relationship with Toni Atkins, the pro tem, if there has ever been one?
That's a great question, Maria Elena. CalCAPA does not have, as far as I understand, a direct relationship with any lawmakers, because this is our first, my team, myself and McKenna, just started working with CalCAPA in November, which is I always use a sports analogy to explain the legislative session. It's the off season. So January through the end of August will be the full legislative session. So we've just begun the 2020 legislative session. We do not have a relationship there. However, we will talk about my recommendations for relationship building with lawmakers. And an important part of that will be CalCAPA executive directors individually contributing to CalCAPA's PAC fund, so that Maria Elena, your executive director, Jeremy, other leaders in the organization have an opportunity to be at these fundraisers and these mixers and rub elbows with these folks. That's the best and most direct and quickest and easiest way to do that relationship building. I will also share that I, as a lobbyist, have an excellent relationship with Senator Atkins, and we work very well together and are on a first-name basis and have tremendous respect for her, and I believe and hope that she has respect for me. So in terms of working with a lobbyist, CalCAPA is in very good hands. But of course, my goal is not just to give fish, but to teach a man to fish, so to speak, and to build a relationship with not just myself on behalf of CalCAPA, but with your leadership as well. And so being active in that PAC and political giving process will be critically important for building that relationship.
Great. And we have another question here from Louise. As a reference point, is there any booklet that lists all elected officials or bureaucracy as contacts?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Louise. In a subsequent future slide, I include the legislature's website, and you can find all lawmakers there. But I will just tell you right now, and then we will get to that slide a little bit later. It's www.legislature.ca.gov, and that's a very easy to navigate website where you can see all of the members of the Senate and all of the members of the Assembly, and also they have a search function there where you can type in your address and specifically locate your own member of the legislature. And then to identify, all of the members of the bureaucracy, I recommend visiting the COLD website, which is an acronym for state agencies, and that's cold, cold.ca.gov. And that lists all state agencies and all of the officers for those agencies.
Okay, and then Maria Elena asked, can we get an email with those?
Absolutely. So that information will be in a subsequent slide on this webinar, but we will send around an email after this webinar, Maria Elena, to the Legislative Committee, and you can share that with all of your colleagues. That will include all relevant publicly available websites that you can access at any time.
No worries. All right, great. Do we have any further questions before we continue? Okay.
So those are all great questions. I was going deep into the weeds on the legislative process, but you probably all remember it from your Civics 101 class or from Schoolhouse Rock. A bill gets introduced, it moves through a policy committee. So in this case, we typically care about the Health and Human Services Committee in the Assembly and the Human Services Committee over in the Senate. Health and Human Services in the Senate and Human Services over in the Assembly. Then typically goes on to a fiscal committee, and or there is some overlap with the process where decisions are made about whether or not whether it's good policy, but whether or not the state has the money to fund it. It moves on to the full floor. So if it was introduced in the Senate, if it was introduced in the Assembly for a vote, and then it goes to the other house. So Senate bills go to the Assembly bills go to the Senate to move through that process. And then to a conference committee where legislators from both houses work out the differences in the versions of the bills that came from both of the houses. And then on to the governor, where he has 3 days to sign or veto the legislation or allow it to become law without his signature. I mentioned the Committee on Human Services in the Senate. It's critically important to legislation that CalCAPA will be concerned about. And once that Friday, this upcoming Friday, February 21st deadline comes and passes, we will have a better sense of what all of the introduced legislation is, so we can actually start advising, here's something we want to support, here's something we might want to weigh in on. But most of all of the legislation that we will be interested in will move through that Committee on Human Services in the Senate. Melissa Hurtado is the chair. She comes out of the South Central Valley and is very active in the Latino caucus. She is definitely a moderate. She beat out incumbent Senator Andy Vidak. A lot of politicos did not expect that she would win. Her seat was previously considered a Republican seat. So she's talented, a little bit of a maverick, and someone that we will want to build great relationships with over the course of her next 12 years in office. Relationships with committee consultants, also incredibly important. We have already started, myself and McKenna, attending meetings with the staff who are the consultants who basically tell everybody on the committee all of the information that they're going to have to decide how to make their vote. So they write an analysis that is a lengthy 5 or 6 or 7 page double-sided, detailed report on every piece of legislation that moves before a committee. And that analysis is really what lawmakers read before they make their decisions. So those relationships are critical as well. And then the Appropriations Committee chair in the Senate is Anthony Pino out of the Pasadena area. He is also important to build a relationship with because that Appropriations Committee is the official spot that every bill goes to be evaluated not based on the policy merits but on the potential cost to the state. And really, that is the Appropriations Committees in both houses are where bills go to die. That's where most pieces of legislation die. As long as something is relatively good public policy, the Policy Committee will usually move the bill forward without thinking about the potential cost to the state. And so most well thought out policy dies because the state doesn't have money to approach. So important relationships there.
Okay.
I see a question.
Yes. So Alan, you asked if you recalled correctly, Senator Atkins was the keynote speaker several years ago at the annual CalCAPA conference. Can anyone confirm this? And then I see a response here, Jonathan, that you'll look more into the records.
Wonderful. Well, that's wonderful.
Great.
We would love to have her back. She's fantastic.
Okay.
And thank you for that. Since we're new to working with CalCAPA as well, it's nice to have you share that institutional history with us, Jonathan. Thank you. The Assembly, I'll move through this fairly quickly because it's really very much the same as it is over in the Senate, except different players. As I mentioned, the Assembly is a little bit more moderate. 80 members, although we still have a more than 2/3 Democratic supermajority. Anthony Rendon, with whom our lobbying team also has a very strong relationship, is out of Los Angeles. He is the Speaker of the Assembly. The process is the same over in the Assembly for legislation moving all the way through. Eloise Gomez-Reyes, with whom we have a great relationship, is the chairwoman of the Health and Human Services Committee, which deliberates on most the policy merits of most legislation that will be of interest and import to CalCAPA. And then Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher out of San Diego is the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee over on the Assembly side. I will note that she is also running for Secretary of State. So she is almost done with her time in the Assembly and hoping to move up to that next position. And then the last players to think about, and these are important to mention because they were a part of the strategy recommendations that we submitted in our proposal to CalCAPA in November, are several of the legislative caucuses. These caucuses represent members in both houses of the legislature who come together to work on issues that they have in common. And several of these caucuses are very involved in and care deeply about issues related to poverty. And the first is the Legislative Women's Caucus, chaired by Senator Connie Leyva. The vice chairman is Assemblymember Monique Limon. The Latino Legislative Caucus, we already mentioned, Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher is also the chairwoman of the Assembly Appropriations Committee. I will note that she is the first woman to chair the Latino Legislative Caucus in many, many years. We've only had one before, and that was about 25 years ago. And then the vice chair of the caucus is Senator Maria Elena Durazo out of the Los Angeles area. Black Legislative Caucus, chaired by Shirley Weber out of San Diego, Dr. Weber. Vice chair is Senator Stephen Bradford. So I throw all those names at you. I know it's a lot, just so that you have a little bit of familiarity. These will all be accessible, the chairpersons and the membership, on the websites that I'll send to you in a subsequent email after this webinar. And these are so important to think about because building relationships with these legislative caucuses in addition to the relevant policy committee chairs and our locally elected lawmakers, is a key CalCAPA's relationship building strategy for 2020. Let's talk a little bit about the California budget process, because that's important to what we care about at CalCAPA as well. The chairwoman of the entire Senate Budget Committee is Holly Mitchell, but there are important policy decisions that get made around the issues that we care about within a subcommittee. So there are 4 subcommittees in that whole Senate Budget Committee, and they take on specific components of developing the legislature's budget proposal, which is a counter to the governor's budget proposal. I see a question.
Nope, we're good.
Oh, great. The chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services is Richard Pan out of Sacramento. He is a pediatrician by day job, by training, before he was a lawmaker, and has spoken very supportively about community action agencies in the past. So it's great to see him in that leadership position. He's definitely a guy we want to keep an eye on and continue to build a relationship with. The Assembly Budget Committee is chaired by Phil Ting out of San Francisco. I will just back up and add that Holly Mitchell, even though she's the chairwoman of the entire Budget Committee, so she deals with everything from energy and transportation to health and human service issues, she cares very deeply about health and human service issues and childhood poverty. So we will want to lean into that relationship as well. Over in the Assembly, Phil Ting chairs the Budget Committee. The Health and Human Services Subcommittee is chaired by Dr. Joaquin Arambula out of Fresno, and he has also spoken very eloquently in the past about supporting community action agencies and wanting to empower our programs. So a great relationship for us to maintain. The way that the budget negotiations work in a nutshell, this is a very complex process, is that the governor proposes his ideas for the state budget in January, and the legislature is chewing on those and making sense of them, and over the course of the spring, March, April, May, the legislature develops their own budget proposal. The Senate develops their own, the Assembly develops their own, then they come together and work out the kinks and differences, and they let the governor know, hey governor, this is our budget proposal, and they continue to negotiate with the governor on what he would like to see at the budget versus what the legislature would like to see. In terms of state spending, the buck really stops with the governor, and so he is usually more responsible for being the fiscally conservative voice in terms of limiting state spending. Usually we will get lawmakers who will, fall on their sword to fight or protect funding for a program, even if they know it will not ultimately be successful, but they have the liberty to do that. And by June 15th, the legislature must finalize their version of the budget that has already been heavily negotiated. So they have some sense of what he's going to sign or not sign and get it over to his desk, and then the governor is required to act. In most years, the legislature does meet that June 15th constitutional deadline. I have seen, I have war wounds, I still think, from years where the budget process dragged on all the way through the summer and into September, and this was during the Great Recession, when the economy was so bad and it was so difficult for the governor and the legislature to make decisions about spending cuts. So, knock on wood, we usually have everything done by June 15th, and I anticipate this year we will as well, but sometimes things can drag all the way into the summer. I will just add finally that budget deliberations are overlapping and ongoing with other legislation, so definitely overlap with appropriations committee deliberations. The question that you hear asked about specific components of legislation all the time is, this is great policy, but is there room in the budget? Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That was the second component of our webinar and probably the most boring one I know. That was our Civics 101 class, just providing a little bit of an overview of the different agencies that we are working with. Before we move into talking about the mechanics of meetings with legislators, I'm going to give everyone 120 seconds for a bio break and take questions, and then we will dive into talking about the specific mechanics of how individual agency directors can reach out to their legislators and request meetings. So where we left off was wrapping up a little bit of a civics overview, talking about the California legislature and the governor and all of the organizations that we intend to build relationships with and reach out to. We are now diving into the basic mechanics of doing advocacy, and forgive me in advance for how bare bones basic all of this will seem to all of you, but you know, it's nice to sort of walk through all of the steps so that you feel like you know what you're doing when we send you out to your districts and say, please set meetings with legislators. As I mentioned earlier in our webinar, CalCAPA's most pressing advocacy goal for 2020 is to grow the capacity of all of our members, all of our executive leaders at agencies throughout the state to engage with legislators in their district offices. The great thing about this is that lawmakers want to develop relationships with important public agency leaders in their communities. So let me start by assuring you that you are reaching out to folks who want to hear from you and who have a process in place in their office to hear from you, to get meetings set with you, to receive feedback from you. This is not a shot in the dark. The lawmakers and staff that you're reaching out to do this all the time, all day long. And so they will know exactly what to do when you call them and reach out to them. As I mentioned earlier, you can find your legislator online at legislature.ca.gov. You want to use the Find My Legislator function, which is easily accessible in the drop-down menu on that website, and then identify the district office for your lawmaker. The goal of doing meetings with our asking executive directors to do meetings in their districts is that on May 14th, when CalCAPA holds its Legislative Advocacy Day up here in Sacramento, it is not the first time that lawmakers are hearing from CalCAPA, lawmakers or their staff, that there have been other points of contact and that they can say, oh yeah, you guys came and spoke to me, or you guys came and spoke to my staff on March 31st, and it was a good meeting, and I got some materials, and welcome back, it's nice to see you again. So they have that touch point in their local community, and they also know that we are touching them up here in Sacramento. So that's why these meetings are so important. It helps establish the relationship and the regularity. When you are reaching out to lawmakers' offices, keep in mind the time of the year and the day of the week. Elected lawmakers are in Sacramento usually Monday through Thursday. As long as there is not a long weekend coming, they are back in their district offices on Fridays. And they are back in their district offices during recesses and when the legislature is out of session. On the legislature.ca.gov website, but I will also include this as a link in an email, you can also access the legislative calendar so that you can see the recesses in the Sacramento legislative session and know that during those times, lawmakers are back in their districts Monday through Friday. So it's a little bit easier to catch them then. But you know what? If that doesn't work for your schedule, then go for a meeting with staff in the district office Monday through Thursday. It is wonderful to meet with staff, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in a subsequent slide. Also remember that you can catch your lawmaker at local events. So don't miss opportunities to show up at a crab feed, try to bump into them at a local parade. you can usually get a schedule by contacting the district office of when and where a lawmaker is going to be at public events that you might have an opportunity to attend and meet them at. Many of them will host Meet Your Legislator every couple of months at their local coffee shop. Those sorts of events are really fantastic to show up to, and it can feel a little contrived or corny the first time that you go, but not a lot of folks show up, and if you're there, it creates an opportunity to have an impromptu 10-minute meeting, and now they have a face to go with their community action agency, and they know exactly who you are. So look for those opportunities too, and they expect that you'll call and ask for those. So the way that you actually request the meeting is that you call the district office, and that will all be available online from the Find My Legislator link. Describe who you are and say, I'd like to submit a request for a meeting. I'm submitting a scheduling request. In almost all instances, the scheduler in the office will ask you to send a follow-up email. So be prepared to send a short email that says, hi, you know, I'm Pamela Lopez. I'm the director of the Sacramento Community Action Agency, and I'd like to take half an hour to talk with you about what it is that we're working on this year. And that's all you have to do, and then send the email and propose a couple of different times. They will know what to do with it, and they will get you onto their agenda. We talked about staff a little bit, meeting etiquette a little bit. It's very valuable to meet with staff. I always prepare people that staff is often so young, and it can be a little bit of a shock. But be polite to them because, you know, staffers remember who has been rude and who has been polite. And those, you know, those staffers are the kind of people that you want to develop relationships with. They're gonna go on to be elected lawmakers in 15 years themselves. And so focus on building long-term relationships with those staffers. They are the eyes and ears of their members. And so if they know you and you know them, that's a great relationship to have. In addition to building a relationship with the lawmaker themselves. Jump right into introductions. Start from the very beginning. You want this meeting to be comfortable for the lawmaker or the staffer with whom you are meeting. And the great way to do that is just start from the very basics. Introduce yourself as the executive director of the Community Action Agency. Introduce yourself as a member of CalCAPA. And then describe what a community action agency is, what it does, where it gets its funding. An important reminder is always that this is a primarily federal funding. So it's a great way for California to get some cash infusion, which we so badly need from the feds. This is money coming to a local community that individual lawmaker, as a sitting member of the legislature, is not responsible for, and they don't have to think about. So they love that, right? This is money coming into your district, and you don't have to vote on spending this money in the state budget deliberations because it's coming from the feds. That's a great place to start. I would expect that most lawmakers and their staff will not know what community action agencies are, or they will need to be reminded. And so share a little bit of the history of the inception of community action agencies. Don't ask them outright if they know stuff. You know, that always makes people uncomfortable. Do you know what a community action agency is? And then they have to say, no, I actually don't. Or often what a younger staffer might do is say, yeah, I know a little bit, and they don't. And then you've missed that opportunity to educate them because they were embarrassed to say, yeah, I don't know. Assume they don't know things, and then say, hey, if I'm telling you something you already know, feel free to interrupt me and just jump right in. But I always like to start from the beginning, and you can say that in your meeting, and that puts folks at ease and makes them feel very comfortable. Share invitations in your meeting, especially for staff, but for lawmakers as well. Hey, why don't you come out to my agency and see what we're working on, see what we're doing, see the programs that we're running. District staff in particular are responsible for spending a certain amount of time out in what they call the field as opposed to just being in the office. So they are supposed to get out there and meet with community members and see what's going on. And so they'll appreciate an invitation to come out and do that. And then keep it Keep it simple. Have 3 main points. Do lots of talking, but most of your talking should be friendly and conversational and conversation openers and talking about what you did this weekend. Keep the main takeaways to 3 main points, and those are CalCAPA's goals for advocacy in 2020. And here are your 3 main points. The first is that CalCAPA is new to legislative advocacy. We don't have to hide that we're doing introductions here and we're starting and we're building something. And you can and should say outright, we want to start building relationships with our lawmakers, and we want to be thought partners with you on issues dealing with community needs and poverty. One great thing about community action agencies is that in a natural disaster, for example, we can act fast to get needs met. We have a lot of flexible sources of funding. So we're here for you. We want you to know us and know who we are. And we're in the process of starting to build relationships with lawmakers. So we hope that this is the first of many successful conversations about addressing our community needs. The second is highlighting why community action agencies are so great. So the first is, hi, nice to meet you. We want to have a relationship with you. We're new to this, but we're going to keep up the good work. The second is, community action agencies are really unique and special, and here's why. That's when you can talk about the history of community action agencies, talk about federal sources of funding, talk about why the work that we do is so special, talk about how important it is to recognize that those who are living in poverty also have expertise about their own experience, and that it's our task to engage them and include them in developing priorities for the work that we are doing in local communities, especially if you're meeting with Democratic lawmakers, which most of you will be. That message will resonate really well. If you're meeting with Republican lawmakers talking about disaster preparedness and being ready to move fast if there's a fire or something, a disaster occurs in a community, is a message that will resonate really well. And then our third point, go ahead, next slide please, is that we hope that you will attend our event on May 14th. This sounds like a really basic thing to ask for, but we've got to start publicizing May 14th now if we want lawmakers to be there. So you want to provide something in writing via email or a written document with the when and where for our legislative reception on May 14th. Laura and Jeremy and Jonathan and those that are working on planning that event, I think can provide you with some documentation that you want to leave behind. But make sure lawmakers know that that event is coming up. Make sure that their staff knows that that event is coming up, and that we hope that, one simple thing that they can do to show their commitment to maintaining an ongoing relationship with us after your first meeting is, please, when you're in Sacramento on May 14th, take 20 minutes to stop by our event and say hello. And then the last thing to share is that, our lobbyists in Sacramento will follow up with you about May 14th. You will see Pamela and Afrak and McKenna in your office, and they'll be talking with you about this. And leave it at those 4 major things. And you will be surprised how much discussion evolves and builds from those 4 major points. And I see several questions, so I'll take them one by one.
Great. So John asks, what would we tell them the purpose of their attendance would be? What information or input would they give or receive?
That's a great question. The purpose of their attendance is to come by and show their support. And it's that simple, and they will not expect for it to be more than that. So we're hoping that they will come by and support the event. We are also hoping that attending the event on the 14th will be an opportunity for them to meet and hear from other community action agency directors that are near to their community, and to give them an opportunity to, you can say, I'm one executive director here in this meeting today, but there are many of us. We hope you'll stop by briefly on the 14th so you can see how big we are and see that we're growing. This is bigger than it's going to be last year. I would really stress that message that this is new, and we're growing this, and we're building this, and it's coming up from the grassroots, and we'd like you to just take 15 minutes to see it and show your support. And say, I want you to show your support by coming by.
Thank you, John, for that question. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay.
That's the end of my slideshow. Let me stop there and ask if there are other questions from the group. I know that this is a lot, but this is also very doable. McKenna has shared with me that we have over 20 folks on the call. Fantastic turnout. This video, it is my understanding, this webinar will also be posted and available online so that it is accessible at other times for others who were not able to join us today in real time. I see another question that has popped up.
Yes, so Maria Elena asks, can we get narrative bullet/email content that we can forward regarding that May 14th breakfast?
Yes, and that is not something that our team leads, but I agree with you, Maria Elena. We need that. I believe that those who are leading efforts to plan the event on May 14th, who are on the legislative committee, have that information. We're certainly happy to help, mock it up or format it or anything like that, however we can help. But maybe offline, we can do some cross-collaboration with the May 14th event chair and get those materials distributed to the group in short order.
Great. Great.
The tool would be, yes, fantastic. Yes, absolutely, Maria Elena. We will poke your event chair when we get off this call. Any other questions? I have something. Please remember to send an email to me after your meeting and include Maria Elena and include Jeremy and John, and just a brief summary saying, hey, I did this meeting and here's how it went. We will be tracking all of these meetings as they are occurring in real time. So we have a sense of who has spoken to whom out there in the state and how those meetings are going.
Great. So Curtis asks, what exactly is planned for the CalCAPA Day in Sacramento?
Good question.
This is Jonathan with CalCAPA. I can answer that question.
Great.
So traditionally what has happened, or at least what has happened last year for the legislative day, was there was a breakfast. We invited legislators and representatives from the agencies in the network. There was an award ceremony recognizing an outstanding state legislator, an outstanding state assembly person, and we also had, I think it was called a Client or Customer Impact Award, where we had a couple of testimonies and stories from people who were recipients of community action programs and services who then either became volunteers or staff members, and sort of seeing the full circle. So we had a couple of those testimonies shared. This year we're planning to retain some, if not all of those elements, and so we're still working with the committee to finalize the exact agenda, but that'll give you a short, brief overview of what to expect. There'll be a breakfast, a short program with some testimonies and maybe some speakers, and then most of the day is really set for people to meet with their legislators.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan. And so, Jonathan, are you able to provide to the group a little bit more specific information about the events on the 14th that we are inviting lawmakers to attend?
Yeah, yes.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Great. And Alan suggests that those in CalCAPA agencies that are in the 2nd Senate District reach out to State Senator Mike McGuire, who's interested in poverty in his district. That is a great suggestion, Alan.
Great suggestion, Alan. Yes. And I would encourage those who are on the webinar today who have leads on lawmakers who are particularly important to reach out to, like Senator McGuire, to reach out to your colleagues after this call. You know, the way you build the network is I have a conversation with you, you have a conversation with two others, they have a conversation with two others, and so forth. And so I think that's fantastic. And Alan, I would encourage you to reach out to a few of those folks and give them a call and see if we can get that meeting to happen.
Great. Maria Elena also suggests that CalCAPA will review tips at the CAC meeting the day before the legislation day, which is great.
Great.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Thanks for that.
Do we have any final questions or thoughts or input that we would like to address? Maria Elena says that was a great basic review and it was really important. I agree. Pamela did an excellent job. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Well, let me just say it's just an honor to be working with all of you, and your mission is so near and dear to our hearts at K Street Consulting. And I am thrilled to have so many community action agency directors who are going to be out there in their communities meeting with lawmakers. This is, you know, this is how we do it. This is how we make change. So thank you all for being here with us on a Tuesday morning after a long meeting, and go get them.
Looks like we have a last question, or one of our last questions here from John. He says, what do you think of the possibility of inviting legislators to visit their local agencies in advance of the legislation day and possibly to have a session with clients?
I think that's a fantastic idea, John. I like it a lot. I also like, you know, my shtick is always teaching advocacy to others. And if we did that, not only would we be supporting community action agencies, but we would be supporting community action agency clients in feeling like it is their right and duty, and it is, to reach out to lawmakers. You know, I think there's such a stigma around being poor and thinking that lawmakers don't respond to you, and our clients are voters like everybody else. And so I love the idea of organizing that. I wonder if it's possible to have one community action agency take the lead in coming up with some sort of template or something like that. I also that could support others in doing that work. I also think it doesn't have to be tremendously complicated. If you are the executive director of a community action agency, sit with a staffer in your district office. This is not even a meeting that you have to necessarily have with a lawmaker initially. Sit with a staffer in a district office and see if you can brainstorm having a listening session for a lawmaker to come out and meet with clients in his or her community. And you know, what an incentive would be for the lawmaker is filming it or creating opportunities for them to do some sort of social media post so they can let others in their community know, hey, I'm out here, I'm meeting with my constituents. That's the kind of stuff that they absolutely love. Great idea.
Great.
I see a thank you to Maria Elena, to everyone for being on the webinar. I echo her thanks. Thank you to Maria Elena for her great leadership thus far with the Legislative Committee, and we are just so thrilled to continue working with everybody. If you get really nervous before your meeting, don't hesitate to call me. We're always here, although you shouldn't be. We are, you know, you are all experts, and lawmakers and their staff need to hear from you. So go get them, everybody.